Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Midwest Whitetail After Hours podcast, presented to you by Hoyt Archery. Tonight is November the 15th. I'm joined by Jared, Owen, Max, Grant, and the world famous Bill Winke. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Good.
Yeah. Last time I said the rut was over, the rut is over for sure in Wisconsin. I have I
Good.
have I have proof on an SD card tonight.
Why don't you start, Jason? Have you been out?
I was out tonight. I didn't go out yesterday because it was 30-mile-an-hour winds and shooting mallards seemed like more fun. But tonight
That's
was
becoming a consistent theme up there in
Yeah, for
Wisconsin.
sure.
that flooded corn. Um, it's a problem. But no, I was out tonight. Beautiful, calm evening. Probably saw 30 deer. I didn't see um, I didn't see my target deer. I did see one that probably is a marginal shooter, I guess. I would not have shot him had he have come closer, but they were just feeding in a piece of that standing cornfield that we've got, a 10-acre field. They were just, in and out of there, not paying any attention to the does at all. The does were paying a lot of attention to my decoy, um, but not the bucks. Uh,
I went out tonight. Well, I guess it's been 3 days since we've had a podcast. So the last couple of days have been pretty solid. I saw my target buck 2 nights in a row. But I was joking about the pine trees before we started. I'm struggling where this buck is living is in a block of pine trees and you can't hunt in the timber because it's just so thick. You can't see 5 yards. So you got to concentrate on the little openings or the edges. And when you get that opening, man, the wind swirls like crazy. It's so unpredictable. So I'm struggling. I had 3 hunts in a row that I had to get down early because the wind was that bad, the swirling that bad. And I just kept feeling like I was going to do too much damage. But I did see him 2 nights in a row, had two good hunts. Tonight, went to the river farm and we had a swing and a miss at the river farm with on a cameraman buck. So we had a solid hunt, but still have yet to put a buck on the ground over here with this team.
Was it that mature 8?
It's a 9. There's a deer that Gavin was actually going to shoot. I've seen this deer 3 times. He lives in this little willow patch, I think. Comes out the same spot every time. Mature 9. He's got kind of like a little turkey foot deal on his G2. Gavin was going to shoot him a few nights ago, or probably a week ago, I guess. Never came within 50 yards. I had Ethan with me tonight, and he was going to shoot him. And it kind of got chaotic. We were in a redneck, and he came out with the doe, and he was feeding for a while, acted like he was going to walk right in front of us, and the doe kind of worked their way off to the corner. And when you're in a blind, you kind of picking and choosing which windows are open, and he sprinted across to catch up with that doe, and it became chaotic in there trying to switch window to window to window. And he stopped like 34 yards broadside, and he just missed a little bit low.
Dang.
But the deer, he ran off. The deer actually ducked. You watch the arrow in slow motion. The deer ducks, and the arrow kind of hits his knee because he ducks into it and deflects off, or off his leg, and runs off into the willows. And 5 minutes later, he comes out, not limping, nothing, just
Good.
like nothing happened, just eating beans, and he was fine. So he stayed at the other end of the field the rest of the night. But other than that, other than that, he was fine. So swing and a miss, but a good hunt. That's 3 hunts in a row that we've seen mature bucks, so it's good. I wouldn't say we've seen crazy rutting activity. 2 nights ago, when we had the encounter with my target buck, we went in at 1:30, and there was already like 7 or 8 deer out, and so we couldn't get to our spot. 7 or 8 deer out in this green plot. We were hunting in the ground, hunting on the ground, planning on trying something different to battle those swirling winds. underneath the pines, it's pretty open. So I was kind of hoping maybe I'd get some consistent wind movement through those pines, staying on the ground. But we couldn't get to our spot because the deer were there. We just kind of inch closer. And by 2 o'clock, there was 20-25 deer in the field. Tons of does, little bucks. And then all of a sudden we see a target buck working his way at probably 2:30 in the afternoon. He's working his way into the field, and he was coming right to where we were trying to get to. And so we, raced down the hill, basically army crawling as fast as we can, because I didn't want him to get to that spot with us not being in bow range. And we couldn't quite get there. And he beat us to that spot and worked his way out. But I bet he worked his way into the field 40 yards from where we were trying to get to if we could have got to where we wanted to.
Oh.
We just had to watch him, and he was pretty typical of mature buck this time of year. He checked kind of all the does, walked around. Their does bedded around the perimeter of the plot. He would make them get up, scent check them, and then worked his way off into the woods. He didn't see anything he liked. He left 25 deer out in the field to go try to find a doe. So it's cool to see. It was a fun hunt.
What day was that, Jared?
That was yesterday, last night.
Okay. Huh. Kind of interesting that we should be right in the middle of the peak of breeding, and none of the does that were out there were in estrus.
No, later in the night, there was one, a lot of the deer were in one area of the field. There's one buck or one doe and a 3-year-old buck that came out in their own little corner and stayed together the whole time. So they may have been paired up. Other than that, none of the does seemed to be in estrus, because they get checked out by every buck in the field, but the bucks would move on once they, would chase them around for a few yards, basically. And it's been interesting. Even checking cameras these last few days, I've seen a lot more mature bucks on their feet than I had probably the previous 5 to 7 days.
You think?
And I don't know if that's area specific or what. I don't know if I'm guessing already been bred, but I'm not sure.
Have you been out, Owen?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I would say that's probably area specific. So since like the 12th, I've seen, same hunts played out each time, like kind of Bill alluded to. I've seen a handful of does, a few small bucks, maybe a 3-year-old in there, but no mature bucks, which tells me they're locked on does. And no pictures of them either since about the 12th. I had some good pictures 11th and 12th and nothing since.
That's about identical. Even though I think that we're a bit north of you guys, in Wisconsin here, it's just exactly what you said. I mean, when you're seeing a bunch of younger bucks and does in the field, but you never are seeing those mature deer that you're targeting, they're probably locked down with those. Is that what I'm hearing?
This time of year, it's probably a safe bet for sure, but it can vary. I mean, this property that I have has a ton of does, so I'm hoping that he's not going to leave that area to go, searching as we start to get past peak breeding. That there should be plenty of does, but I've been surprised. It's actually 3 days in a row he's been in that field before 3 o'clock
without a doe.
And without a doe.
Wow,
that's wild.
I keep seeing in my blog too, Jared. I said, once this buck breaks free from that doe, he's most likely going to be on his feet until he finds another doe. So, I mean, if you catch that window, you got a real good chance of tagging him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crazy. It just must be the fact that there's no hot doe or doe in estrus right there, but there's so many of them. You would think just from a number standpoint, there would be one, but he seems to be on his feet and looking all day, the last 3 days.
Yeah, we're seeing the same thing. I think Grant and I mean, as far as deer numbers go, we had the best hunt of the season tonight. And I think oh my gosh, mature does at least saw 15 to maybe 20. Not one deer that I would say is older than 3. I don't know what in the world. I would assume that's the mature bucks in the area are locked up. But I've seen that now several days in a row. So I'm hoping, golly, you got to think that chain breaks here shortly in the next, almost one of those things where I was telling Grant as we were walking out tonight, you don't see that many does and don't go back. It's got to break free.
Yeah, once we pass this period, this like the third week of November leading up to Thanksgiving is some of my favorite days to hunt. I almost like that better than the first week of November for my properties anyways. You know, you combine the does and even the bucks a little bit, starting to think a little bit more about food as we get to colder weather. And the bucks are still trying to find the does, but the does are really easier to find on those food sources. And I've just had so many big deer encounters, and you start to get some new bucks that are traveling around too if you have a lot of doe. So I really like this time frame that we're about to enter. And plus we got good weather coming up later this week too. So I may actually pull a couple all day sits at the end of this week, just mainly for the fact that I'm afraid if I leave, it's going to be hard to get back in without busting anything as early as these deer are coming out. This afternoon, I actually moved a redneck blind into this spot to try to battle the swirling winds in there. So may just get in early in the dark and stay all day.
Do you keep the windows open, Jared, when you're in there, or do you close them?
So I've been going, I had this conversation today. I've been going back and forth. What I've been doing in areas where I have a spot where I think the deer likely won't be, you know, I'm playing it like a tree stand, like I'm blowing a wind in a specific direction. I try to create kind of like a current through the blind. So I run the ozonics out the downwind side window, and then I open the upwind side window to create that draft of air. So the air movement goes through, is very predictable, and it's going through the ozonics machine as it goes out the window. This spot though, I don't know. I'm leaning towards just keeping everything shut up until we have to actually do it, because they can come from anywhere, and plus the wind's likely gonna swirl if no matter what windows I have open. So I go back and forth. I think it depends on the situation, but in this spot, I'm leaning towards keeping everything sealed up.
Yeah, it's kind of miserable because of the condensation, but I felt like I was getting away with murder on the farm that we sold doing that. We could set up right almost in the middle of a food plot, and it didn't seem to matter where the deer came from as long as the windows were closed. We got away with it. But then you've got two things. You've got the condensation you got to keep off the window, and then you got to figure out how am I going to get this window open,
right?
In time to get the shot, and that can be kind of tricky too. But I guess it's better to have the deer at 20 yards than have 15 deer back in the woods blowing at you, and then try to figure out how to get the window open.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pick the lesser of two evils there.
Yeah.
Bill, earlier you said the peak of estrus, which is really the peak of the rut. I guess some people don't think of it that way, but that's what it is. So we've got, in essence, some really good stuff in front of us yet.
Yeah, I always felt like the week leading up to the peak, and then the week leading away from the peak, were the times when the hunting was the best. During the peak, which is that week where the 15th is in the middle, like say 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. I always felt like things slowed way down. And 20th, like Jared said, the 20th to the 26th has always been really good in the past for me too. So I don't like that very middle of November. I don't like the peak of the rut, so to speak, the peak of breeding, just because of that reason. It's just, the bucks are, some of them anyway. I mean, every one of them seems different though. I mean, some bucks will spend a day with the doe and move on, and some bucks will spend 2 days or 3 days or whatever. I don't know, how, what the difference is of what they're seeing, in the does, but some of those bucks, you just lose them completely for about a week, right during the middle of November. Then they pop back out again about the 20th. I mean, what do you see, Owen? I know you see a lot of deer down there.
Yeah, I mean, exactly what you're describing. I think that 15th, maybe 17th, right in there is peak breeding. That's when I see the most bucks tending does. And so I would say, like you say, maybe the week before that and the week after would be, some better hunting. But the more, if you're hunting a specific deer, the more I hunt the rut, the least I like it, the less I like it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They're just not patternable, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. October is starting to show better and better for us, you know, and for the Midwest Whitetail guys too. I know that, but you know, as far as just being able to get on those deer that we're after, that last week of October is pretty hard to beat.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
So
So
I do
Bill,
think if you get back on food though, I do feel like the 22nd, 24th, 26th in that time frame, if you're on, say, a more isolated food source, I think you're going to see pretty much everything that's in that area. I do think they hit those spots pretty hard again once that rut starts to wind down.
Yeah,
so Bill, I'm probably a little behind the times, but we were talking today. I try to stay off social media as much as possible, but my cameraman said that you killed a good one, so I'm anxious to hear the story.
Yeah.
And also, Bill, you got to talk about the sleeping bag thing. I watched one podcast. I'm interested to hear about that.
It actually
9,000 Instagram comments about it.
Yeah, it actually works, but it's miserably boring. Because if you think about it, now we're on daylight savings time and it gets dark about 5:15, right? So you climb down out of your tree. The normal person goes home, gets something to eat, watches Monday Night Football, hangs out with the family and friends, whatever, for a little while, calls a buddy. I climb down at 5:15 and get into my sleeping bag and go to sleep. Oh, it's brutal. It really is. I mean, it's super boring because you got 12 to 13 hours before you can climb out of the sleeping bag and get back up into your tree stand again. But it does work because you don't have that coming and going, from the spot. So like, let's say, for example, in my hunts were all on ridges and they're bedding areas on the farm that I was hunting. And they're super hard to get to because I don't have access to them from above. So I've got to access all these ridges from the valley below. And that's where all the corn is. That's where all the food is. So coming down out of those in the evening, heading back to my, four-wheeler, whatever, I'm going to bump a lot of deer, not only on the ridge, but also down in the feeding area. Same thing in the morning. You think, well, how am I going to get back into that stand again in the morning without bumping half the deer on this whole farm? So finally, I came to the conclusion that the only way this is going to work is if I sleep as close as possible to my tree. And then I just don't leave. So you come and go at midday and you can get away with it. And it's really surprising. I mean, we could spend a whole podcast talking about how many deer I snuck past during the middle of the day that were in their beds. It's almost like they go into a funk where they just don't hardly pay attention to what's going on around them. I mean, literally not even behind them or anything, just walk past 60 yards away. They're kind of halfway looking at me, halfway asleep. I don't know what they're doing, but they don't even, it's weird. But anyway, I've gotten away with that and it's worked really well. But
how far away did you set up your camp from your tree?
It depended upon the location. The closer, the better. But it takes a lot of judgment. This isn't like a one size fits all because it's sort of like, where are the deer less likely to go? Where's the closest place you can set up where you're not likely to have a deer trip over you during the night? That's where you go. I had one spot was literally 20 feet away. It was in where they'd cut a tree up, cut a tree down, logging, and then there was a deadfall, whatever you want to call it. I just crawled right into the middle of that deadfall, and that worked really well. And that was only about 15 or 20 feet away from my tree. And that was the easiest one to come and go to. Because you can imagine, even if you're 100 yards away from your tree, you still have to get to it in the morning. And if it's dead still out, you still got to get to it. And the other thing I learned, which was interesting, was there are some does that filter back into those bedding areas at like 4 a.m. You think when you climb down, they're all gone. I mean, there's no deer anywhere around. You think, well, they're not coming back until daylight, but it's not true. They start filtering back during the middle of the night. So when you wake up at 6 a.m, let's say 45 minutes before legal shooting time, there might be one standing 40 yards away, which kind of sucks because then that doe, you may not spook her, but then she spends the next 3 or 4 hours trying to figure out where you went because she knew you were there. And then all of a sudden you weren't there anymore. And that's because you climbed up into your tree. So it was a very interesting learning experience. I don't recommend it. If anybody asks me, should I do this? I'd say only if you absolutely have to. You don't do it because you want to, because it's really boring. But especially if you're doing all day sits. Let's say you do an all day sit and you climb into your sleeping bag for 13 hours and you get up and you do another all day sit. Oh my gosh. You better be seeing a deer every 20 minutes or you're going to be bored to death, because it just, it just grinds you down. But anyway, it does work, but it's pretty situation specific. You wouldn't do it unless you had to. I think some of the guys that hunt way deep in public land, that's for sure the way I would do that. You hear people say, "Oh, I walk for an hour and a half to get back to my spot." I would never do that. I would just carry this little camp, that I had and do what I did, and it works well. I mean, the deer weren't really picking up on me, but it's just miserably boring to have to climb into your sleeping bag. And you think, "Oh, why don't you read your on your phone or whatever, watch a video." The problem is it's 32 degrees. So once you get into that bag, you put your arms in, you zip it up around your chin, last thing you want to do is push your arms out through there and try to look at your phone, so you don't really have that many options as far as stuff to do.
Yeah.
When you're going in, are you doing hanging hunts, or are these pre-hung stands, or what's the deal?
Both. I mean, I didn't have any stands up on the farm. So the first time in was a hanging hunt. So I'd be going in there with this rubber bag filled with my camp, plus, all my stuff for hanging in the stand.
Good grief.
So it was a real
more than it was camera gear for you back
then.
then.
It was, it's pretty miserable. And then, this is all that bluff country and I don't have access from above. So I got to hike up, climb up in. But, I'm far enough away from home where I don't have any distractions. So I don't have anything else to do during the middle of the day, so I can head to my afternoon stand at 10 o'clock in the morning, so I can take my time and, it was okay. It was okay. It's just, it's just a pretty hardcore way to do something that is supposed to be fun. And you can, after a couple of days of that, you kind of wonder. I think I hunted for 20 days and I think I didn't sleep in the woods like 4 or 5 days. So like 15 nights, it was either in the redneck blind or up on the ridge. And then I'd come out at midday, run into the little Quick Star gas station and get a cup of coffee and a sausage biscuit or whatever, and then go back out again. So that was how I kept my sanity, was by leaving at midday.
Nice.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
And this is how you ended up killing your buck?
Well, I mean, I would say that helped.
Yeah.
I went in that afternoon at midday, so I hadn't stayed overnight to get that deer. But that was the ridge that I was hunting the whole season. And I feel like if I would have been coming and going all the time, without sleeping out there, that there's a pretty good chance that all the deer living on that ridge would have known that I was there. So I think just that led to it, I believe, just by keeping the spot fresher and keeping the deer from being educated, but it didn't directly lead to that buck because, like I said, I snuck in at midday that afternoon when I killed him.
I remember I saw a post, Bill, that you made when you had killed him. Did you run cameras out there? You said, I forget what the post said, you'd recognize the deer. Is that just from encounters previously in the season?
I ran cameras up there last year, and I didn't get a chance this year for a couple of reasons. So I had only leftover information from last year's camera runs. And he was a deer, though, that I'd passed up in that same exact spot on that ridge the year before. And I had a bunch of pictures of him the year before, around that ridge. So I kind of knew that was where he lived. He seemed like a homebody. So I felt, good about going into the season without any trail camera photos of just hunting that one deer. But he was the only solid buck on the farm that I knew of. And if there was another one, I don't know, because I never saw in those 20 days any other bucks that I would have shot, which is kind of shocking.
Yeah.
Because it's a pretty good area, 500-acre property, it sets up real nice. And I think he was the only buck on there that I would have shot. And but he was a deer that I'd passed the season before. So that's how I saw him 5 times. And the night I killed him was the 5th time I saw him this season.
Wow.
So he was in there a lot when I was up there. I was seeing him, relatively frequently.
How'd that afternoon hunt unfold?
He was I snuck in, and And there was another buck there that I might have shot that when I went up the side of the ridge, he stood up out of his bed and was trying to figure out what I was. But as long as you don't move, people say that you can't outweight a deer, but you can outweight a deer. You just don't move, and then they lose interest eventually and walk off. And that's what he did. And then there was another buck bedded about 50 or 60 yards from my stand. And then, like I said, it's kind of odd how you can get away with this stuff. I just kind of snuck past him. I could see him playing his day. He never even looked my direction. But once I got in, then I didn't see, what did I see? 3 or 4 bucks during the afternoon, no does. And then it was 4 o'clock. So a little bit over an hour before the end of legal shooting time, I saw some movement off to my right, and he stood up and shook himself off. So he was about 125 yards away, bedded. And I thought he was alone, and he started heading my direction. And I started to reach for my grunt call, and I thought, well, if this doesn't work out, I'm going to grunt at him. But then I saw this doe. He was following a doe, and a lot of times on those slopes like that, and I'm sure you guys have seen it, they side hill on the downwind side. So I was set up. We had a north wind. I was set up on the south side of an east-west ridge. So I was about 40 yards, 45 yards down from the top of the ridge, 50 yards, whatever it was. Anyway, the doe took the very top of the ridge, and then he was about 10 yards down from her, just kind of staying a little bit behind her and paralleling. And so I didn't have to stop him, fortunately, because, at that distance, if I would have put him on alert, I think I'd have been in trouble. But he stopped naturally in an opening at about 40 yards, and I made a good hit on him. So it was, him following a doe very, very slowly in my direction. They were heading toward the fields, but they weren't in any rush by any means. Interesting. The other thing I've noticed, and maybe you guys have seen it too, the activity in those areas starts about 2.5 hours before the end of legal shooting time, and is done about an hour before the end of legal shooting time. I mean, I almost never see anything, within that last hour when you're hunting up on those bedding ridges. But it's fast and furious up until then, but then it dies really fast. And I think he and that doe were the last ones to come off the ridge. They were heading towards the food behind everybody else.
How was the activity in the mornings in there? I know you said that deer start filtering back well before daylight, but did you see that movement later into the mornings?
Yeah. And I think it's mostly the bucks then, although the does do seem to change location some, during the morning too. But I feel like they get back into those places first, and then the bucks are just out cruising around, checking 2 or 3 different bedding areas. So they seem like the behavior or the movement with the bucks seems to last longer into the mornings than the movement of the does. But I'm sure it goes all day long. There's just a point in there where, unless you're going to stay overnight up there again, there's a point where you have to get out. In the middle of the day is your best opportunity to get out. So that's when I would change locations, if I was going to change locations, was during the middle. But yeah, I think it was hard. It's a hard farm to hunt. And I'm just glad that I didn't have a cameraman, because that would have been pretty brutal. I'm sure that I don't know that I could have expected another guy to sleep out there like that. And in good conscience to say, hey, we're going to stay out here for 2 or 3 days, bring a couple of, turkey sticks and a can of whatever you want to drink, we're going in. But, it works out good if you're by yourself and you don't feel obligated to the comfort of somebody else.
I remember you saying that about the buck you killed last year too, when we were talking about it, and even beyond just like the comfort of the cameraman, not feeling bad for him. And I know we've talked about this before, but the things you can get away with as one person compared to two, being able to sneak past deer and all that type of stuff is dang near impossible when you have 2 people.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I've noticed is and you and I have talked about this, Jared, and so I want your listeners to appreciate how hard it is what you guys are doing. I don't think it's twice as hard to kill a deer with a cameraman, a nice buck. I think it's 4 times as hard. So when somebody kills a good buck hunting on camera, self-filming is different, but when you have 2 people, that's more than twice as hard to pull that off, because the locations you can hunt are limited. You can't get into any tree that you want to get into. It's got to be just the right setup. the noise you make, the movement, everything is just way compounded. So I don't know. I mean, in this situation, the way this hunt unfolded, there's a pretty good chance I could have killed this buck with a cameraman that day. But I'm not sure that, you take the whole season as a whole, would that buck have still been living up there if I'd have been hunting 20 days on that ridge, with another person? There's a pretty good chance that he'd have been long gone. It's just so hard to hide two people either on the ground or in the tree.
Do you think, Bill, you're able to get away with more when you're talking about like walking past deer, and specifically in this area on these ridges? Do you think that you're getting away with some of this stuff on that location because the deer are just not used to human pressure at all? Is that something? Do you think you could have done the same kind of stuff on your old farm or no?
Yeah, I think I could have. And I used to. I remember one time, this goes back many, many years. There was a big property that I was a part owner of. It was a subchapter S corporation. We had 4,100 acres at the time. And that area got a fair amount of hunting pressure, believe it or not. But there was tons of deer. So it was impossible at the end of a morning hunt to ever climb down from your tree stand and not have at least some deer around you, if you're hunting in bedding areas. And I remember a couple of different times when I would climb down. One time there was 2 6-pointers that were bedded, I'm saying 25 yards max from my tree. And I climbed down, they laid there in their beds and watched me climb down and walk off. I mean, not a stick between us. They just laid there chewing their cud, watched me climb down and walk off. And I think it's once they've vetted that location, like they've gone through and they've done their, research and they feel comfortable about the spot, I think they kind of shut down the alarm system. It's a weird thing.
That's interesting.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm not saying every deer is going to do that, but that was really shocking to look over my shoulder and they were still bedded there watching me when I was walking away. So there's something happens to them, and it's I wouldn't try to depend on it, for a hunting strategy, but it was an eye opener to me for sure this year because I snuck past a ton of deer.
That's super interesting. Do you think, Bill, that most of that I've hunted extreme western and southwestern Wisconsin, and now I'm hunting, we'll call it south central Wisconsin, so two very different pieces of topography. Do you think a lot of what you're talking about is not just the bedding areas, but having to do the sleeping bag thing? Is that just because of the topography?
I think it's the access that drives it. If you can't get in and out clean, then either you can't hunt the spot or you have to stay. Because, if you're bumping deer every time you go in and out, regardless of the topography or the setting, if there's no clean way in and out, then, at my old farm, I just didn't hunt those spots because I didn't feel like sleeping out there. That's ridiculous. So I just didn't hunt those places. I just hunted the places where I could get in and out. But this farm, unfortunately, doesn't have hardly any spots that are accessible, and definitely not where this buck that I was hunting was living. So I think it's dependent on access more than it is topography to answer that question. If you can't get in and out, you have two options. Either you don't hunt it or you don't leave once you get there.
So you're saying come in midday.
Yep.
And stay till midday.
Yep. And I think if you wanted to come up with a really cool way to hunt it, I gave some thought to it. And if you own the land or had enough control, you could build small little shelters, little boxes practically that you could sneak to and crawl into. Then you wouldn't have to carry all that stuff and put those camps up, because I'd put them up. So I'd go in, set up my camp, then I'd go hang my stand. And, of course, once you got your camp set, you got to hide it. So you got to, throw a whole bunch of sticks and, leaves and stuff over it. And then you got to climb back down again, take all the sticks and leaves off, climb in there, sleep, put all the sticks and leaves back on in the morning, because nobody wants to fold all that stuff up in the dark. So now you got to hide it again. Then you go up into your tree. And if you're going to, it depends on how many days you're staying, but you still have a lot of extra messing around that you have to do. If you just had little shelters scattered around that you could sneak to, then, it might be a little bit better, because, you might be able to say, well, I'm going to at least be able to look at my phone or do something in here, rather than just being in a mummy bag for 13 hours.
Would you move your camp setup based on like wind changing?
Yeah, you would, because you'd hunt different locations. So you could
Yeah.
only do this if the wind was going to be consistent for the period of time that you had planned on being there. So, like,
Yeah.
let's say you had a north wind this evening and tomorrow morning, it'd work perfect. Go in at midday, hunt the evening, the next, sleep wherever you could nearby. Next morning, hunt it and climb down at midday, put your camp in your bag and sneak out. I think it has to be a wind that doesn't change during the period of time that you're going to be there. But you
That's
could
where
move. I think once you get in those bedding areas, you have to be on a point A to point B deal. You're sneaking out or you're sneaking in. I don't think you can sneak around, if that makes
Yeah.
any sense. I think you got to be on the direct route, following the ditches and getting the heck out of there, rather than saying, okay, I'm going to move to a different part of this bedding area. I think then you're going to mess it up.
Yeah.
How are
Did you have
get-
any?
Go
Go ahead,
Jared.
Jason.
Okay. How did you get in clean during the middle of the day, or isn't getting in clean in the middle of the day as big of a deal as getting in there clean in the dark?
I think it's not as big of a deal, but it's way easier to get in clean during the middle of the day. Because, if it was, put it this way, if it was still, I wasn't going up there. So then I would go to a ground blind, then I would spend the night sleeping in the ground blind. And then, because again, these ground blinds aren't any better for access in that valley than, going up on the ridges, because to get out of there, I've still got to walk through all those deer to get back to where my truck is. So I spent probably half or more of the night sleeping out in the blind. And then the other, the rest of them were up on the ridges. But if it was going to be still where I couldn't get in clean, I just cut my losses and got in a blind, on the feeding areas as close as I could possibly get to that ridge. And all of my blinds were scattered around that ridge, because I went into the season, hoping to kill this deer. So everything kind of revolved around that. So even when I was in the blinds, I felt like I was in the game. Even in the mornings, people think that, those hunting around feeding areas in the mornings might not be that good, but there's a fair amount of activity, even in the mornings in some of those spots. And I wasn't setting the blinds like out in the middle of the feeding areas. They'd be tucked like into areas where there was a bunch of scrapes, or, kind of like traditional rutting areas right on the edge of these feeding areas. So that's where I had my blinds. So on a still day, I would go to the blind. I wouldn't risk bumping a bunch of deer, going up into the bedding areas if it was dead calm and crunchy dry leaves. But wet leaves or wind, I wouldn't be afraid at all to go right up in there. Just got to go slow.
Did you see that buck? Sorry, did you see that buck on any blind sits, or did you see him all 5 times up on that ridge?
I saw him one time on a blind sit. The first time was the 26th of October, but he came off the ridge. That's where he was coming from, and he went down into the bottom and was working a scrape line down in the bottom. And that's when I started going in after him. And I had him on the 30th at very, very close range. I went in super early. I think I was in there at like 10 a.m. Had my camp set up, did all that stuff. So I was in the tree by probably 11:30, and I had, a decent amount of activity that day. And about 2 o'clock, and this was before daylight savings time, so that's 4 hours before the end of legal shooting time, I was just kind of sitting there daydreaming, and I hear this deer blowing right behind me. And it was, wet leaves. He'd snuck in behind me like 5 yards away, and it was him. Ironically, that's the same tree I killed him out of. So that was October 30th. So I killed him on the 12th of November out of the same tree. But, he wasn't on that trail right by the tree. He was, like I said, he was up on top of the ridge following that doe. But that was, I saw him then. And then when the wind was from the south for a stretch there of a few days, I switched over to the other side of the ridge and did my little sneak in camp out thing on the other side. And I saw him twice on that side. So every time I saw him was on the ridge, either like that one time you said, asked about, but the other 4 times were on the ridge itself.
Wow.
He was, it's just like I was telling Jared in the email last year, people are going to think that that place is just awesome, and that, I really got this thing wired. But the reality of it is I've been getting pretty lucky, and I just don't think that your run of luck can continue. You can't live on luck. At some point it evens out. And I had enough of it the last couple seasons there that I know it's going to even out and catch up with me here soon. But it worked because I think I was, we were talking about, the stealth factor of hunting alone. I think it worked, but there's a lot of luck. I mean, it's anytime you kill a big deer, there's a fair amount of luck, but I think I've had more than my fair share on that property.
I like your theory on luck, because that gives me hope that mine's coming.
No, it does even out. I mean, Owen, you're still on, aren't you, Owen?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. I said, I always say the same thing, Bill, only I say the bad luck's going to even out eventually. We're going to have good luck.
Yeah. I don't like saying the good luck is going to even out and I'm going to have bad luck. No,
Right.
that's not much fun, but unfortunately it's probably real.
Yep, I've had those years. I've said that, on the blogs even. I'm like, eventually these swing back in your favor. They all average out.
It does average out. Yeah. You just got to keep hunting smart and not get too discouraged. And you got to have good hunting areas. You're not going to kill big deer hunting places where there aren't big deer, but if you're hunting areas where there's big deer and you're just not seeing them, it's just a matter of time. Just keep
one more question on the camping setup, Bill, then we can move on. But did you have any interesting nighttime encounters, like middle of the night stuff?
Yeah, I did. I mean, that was the fascinating part, really. I mean, if you're going to say, was it fun? It was only fun when you woke up at 2 a.m. and listened to what was going on around you. That was actually pretty dang interesting because, at one point, I think it was a little 6-point buck, saw me climb down and get into my sleeping bag one night. I mean, I think he was close enough that even though it was fairly dark, I didn't see him. He either saw me or heard me or something. And he was just fascinated by where I went. And it really bugged him. And he would literally run circles around my little camping spot at various times during the night. He might come and do it at, 10:30. And he might come back again at 2 a.m. and then again at 4:30. And he was around there and he'd come back and make loops, and just try to figure out where I was. Why couldn't he find me? And then I had coyotes a few times that were really tearing it up. And you know how fun they are when they get to yipping and yapping, and there might be 3 of them, but it sounds like there's 20 of them, and so I had a couple of nights where they were, relatively close to where I was camped out, and that made the hair rise on the back of your neck. You'd hear some crunching sometimes of stuff, you didn't really know for sure what it was, but something would go crunching past during the night, and you'd get that little adrenaline rush of, they're like 20 feet away or 10 feet away, walking past where you're sleeping on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
But it's cool. I mean, that was the fun part. Like I said, if there was a fun part to that overnight, it was the cool stuff that you got to listen to during the middle of the night when you're out there. I didn't do it in the rain. Trust me, that would not have been fun in the rain either. But it worked good on those starlit, nice, crisp and cool nights. You could hear all kinds of cool stuff out there.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Anybody else been out, Owen?
Just the last 3 days that I talked about, it basically was the same hunt over and over. Few does and the young bucks, just no mature bucks to speak of.
I've been meaning to ask you, Owen, too. I meant to text you. I saw that. Are you getting a decent amount of pictures of Wolverine? I know he's kind of your boy right now, at least from what I know. That's your guy.
Yeah, I think the 12th, he was all over the cameras on the 12th. So I was confident he was not doed up at that time. So we went in to hunt him and he just went AWOL, right after that. So I assume he picked up a doe and, he was off the grid for 2 or 3 days. And of course you keep thinking, well, he's going to break off that doe eventually, and then he's going to be all over the place again. But if I was smart, I'd just quit hunting him and go to a different area. But apparently I like the challenge or something.
Yeah. I remember, do you remember Larry Zock? Do you guys, I'm sure you know him, Jared, right? Did you know him, Owen?
Yeah. Yep.
that was always Larry's theory. And Larry was he was a really good bow hunter. I'm sure he still is, but he would just take like 4 or 5, 6 days off during the middle of November every year and just kind of give his area a little bit of time to freshen up. And, he'd go do whatever he had to do in the office and just get away from it and then come back to it on the second side, on the back side of the breeding. And that's what I was going to do this year if I wouldn't have killed. I was coming home for 4 or 5 days and then go back. But, I killed that night that I was going to go home. So I got lucky again.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Give yourself a chance to reset, and there might not be a lot going on anyway as far as the buck you're after.
Yeah, because your odds are going to be lowest during the whole month of November. I feel like your odds are lowest during those 5 or 6 days right in the middle of the month.
Yep, absolutely.
So if you have to take a break, that would be the time to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't see a lot of people making or prognosticating that you're going to have a tremendous amount of success on the 15th. I think I've killed one. Actually, I've killed my biggest deer on the 15th, and I did that simply because he busted loose. It was a Sunday morning. He busted loose of a doe, and we knew that he did. And actually, I had a cameraman in the tree with me. He busted loose with a doe that Saturday evening, so he was all over the property the rest of the day on Saturday evening, and then Sunday morning I think we saw him 3 or 4 times until he eventually came into a grunt call. And
yeah, because I went back recently and tried to come up with the dates of every buck that I've ever killed with a bow, and I've always hunted every day of the rut. I didn't do the Larry Zock strategy. I would hunt right on through there, but I might get away from the one that I was after. But I had maybe one buck that I'd kill between the 13th and the 18th of November.
Really?
Even after 30 some years of hunting every day of the month of November, I could only account for maybe one during the middle of the month. So it's been really slow for me, but some of it has to do with the way you hunt too, though. I think, like people will say, what's the best day of the season? Well, tell me where you're going to be hunting. You'll be hunting around food. Are you going to be hunting deep in the cover? What's your, then that will also play into, where the deer are at and where they're most active. So it could just be that the way I hunt didn't lend itself to success in the middle of November.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably accurate, but I think by and large, if you're going to tip the scales in your favor, what you're talking about is probably the days if you're going to take some days off, those would be the ones.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we all go back and look at our trail camera pictures from historical data, I think we'd all say the same thing. Owen, the buck that I've been after disappeared exactly on the 11th. Haven't seen him since.
Yeah. Seeing the same thing.
Max,
Bill,
do you want to go ahead, Bill?
Go ahead. No, I was going to say they'll resurface pretty soon, though. I mean,
Yeah.
18th to 20th, somewhere in there, those bucks will resurface.
Just in time
Yeah.
for the Wisconsin gun deer season.
For me to have a chance. Yeah, well, I'm hoping what you guys are saying. I've actually never, I don't know, obviously I've only hunted Iowa now. I didn't hunt at all really for myself last year, but this would be my second, full season. So I haven't really had the chance. The hunting in the South is somewhat poor, year round. It's just tough hunting. So I'm excited to see, as my first full season, kind of going hard at it. I'm really excited to see what these next few days hold, because it's beating me up pretty good. I had, I think Owen, you had a streak, Mike had a streak where I was just like shooter, or at least mature buck, day and day, different deer, same deer, multiple. And then it has just been stone cold. So I'm excited to see, and hopefully, what you guys are saying, that they break free. They can't all, they're not all gone, and very few.
No.
I have a really good, I know a lot of the neighbors and all of these farms. I know everybody seems to be having the same slow hunt. So I'm excited to see, and I'm not the only one out there having slow hunts. So I'm excited to see for myself it actually turn back on.
Yeah, don't burn out your good spots right now, because sometime around the 20th, they're going to get good again. And,
Yeah, that's what I was
if
kind
you're-
of worried about. Grant and I are even talking about that. Same thing. We hunted the same farm, and it's not a very big farm, and we've hit it hard
Mhm,
because we
mhm.
had a giant and he was super active, and so we are like, we got to be in there. And then I'm starting to feel now that I should have slacked off when he started, because now we've been in there a ton. We've noticed that the 10 does we're seeing have shrunk to seeing 3 does, and some of that could be breeding, but man, you just get this eerie feeling when you go from these fiery hunts to slacking off. I'm worried that maybe we're putting a little too much pressure on it, because like you said, I really like appreciate what you say about going in and out and being more careful. It's too easy when you're excited about hunting a farm or a spot. It's too easy to just go trucking in there. Even in the dark, I catch myself getting in there too fast and making too much noise.
Yeah,
Yeah.
don't feel bad, Max. I mean, I think Bill and I probably combined have 80 years of bow hunting experience, and I don't think I've killed a deer from the 15th to the 20th. Not
Yeah.
one.
Yeah,
So,
isn't that something? It's
Yeah.
amazing, Owen.
That
It really
is
is.
insane.
yep, you get into the 20s
Yeah.
though, then we got a few, you know.
Yeah, I'd say, yeah, for sure. So that's why I'd say, Max, you want to be careful that you don't press too hard right now. Give it a few days, let those deer relax, get comfortable in there, and then strike when the iron's hot again, sometime around the 20th.
Do you use trail cam? I know you're probably not even running too many trail cameras, but and for you, do you wait for that to start heating back up, or you just give it that couple of days rest and you go back in?
I said that exact same thing to Joe today. I said I might just wait until I get a picture of him. Now I know he's not, he's
Yeah.
not bowed up, so then I'll go back in after him. Right now I'm pretty sure he is. So you're just kind of burning out your spots,
Yeah, I know, Jared, me and you have talked lately about, I used to be like, I'd run cameras, but I never had any cellular cameras and wasn't big on really pulling cards. And then this year I've went haywire with just cameras all over, just spending tons of money. And honestly, it hurt me probably early, and then had a couple of good encounters of deer I didn't have any pictures of. And then now I'm starting to wonder if maybe I need to start leaning back on cameras a little bit.
I got a phone call from Max tonight when he's walking into the Dollar General. I think he wants to know about how many batteries a Cuddyback model, a specific model, takes. 4 or 6. Like, Max, just buy 6. Like, you
Yeah.
need the 2 batteries. He goes, I thought it might be tagged out by this time. I'm not expecting to keep
I did
running
not
cameras this
expect to be
late.
still running cameras right now. Before we get too much further, we put out on social. I know that we had a little bit of warning that we were getting Bill on here, so we asked for some questions, and we got a couple of good ones if we want to try to get through a couple before we end things.
Yeah, maybe just run through 1 or 2 good ones quick.
We've kind of already hit on it, but the first one is it worth to even hunt during the lockdown phase?
I think that, in my experience, no. Just a simple answer. You can kill deer then, but you have to have a hot doe right there. I think you have to have that doe that buck is within bow range of your tree stand. And the odds of that are pretty low. So, I keep doing it. I just don't go into my good spots. I rest the spots where I think that deer is living, and then get back after him, after the 20th, personally.
When they lock up like this, are you guys assuming that they're staying in tight quarters all day long? Or I know some people talk about, maybe you're still hunting those food sources, hoping that she drags them out there. But when they're really locked down, I would assume, and from what little I know, but they're like actually locked up, like pinned down.
Yeah. The last thing that doe wants is to be chased by more than one buck. So in my experience, they literally hole up. And find, the most inaccessible spot. Sometimes it's a CRP field. Sometimes it's a fence line out in the middle of nowhere. They try to get away from the other deer. And they can't always do that, but that's a lot of times where you find them during that time. What about the rest of you guys? When you do find them locked down, where do you find them?
Like you say, out in a ditch or some obscure place. And a lot of times if you watch too, that buck won't let her go where she wants to go. You've all
Right.
seen them cutting her off, like a horse, or whatever. Won't let her go where she wants. So,
Yeah, they don't
Yeah,
want competition.
right.
Yeah, you see them in some pretty obscure places this time of year. But going back to the question, my answer would be it can be dependent, right? I think if you have a lot of acres and you don't have maybe a ton of pressure or something, then don't put all your efforts into this time frame, hunt before or after. But I think there are situations where you just need to be there. We all know it takes a lot of luck to kill a big mature buck. And if you're on a small property and you're just hoping to be there when he is because he's only there every once in a while, or maybe it's a spot that you have really good access and you're not going to burn out by hunting it over and over again. I mean, you can't kill them by sitting in your office. So in situations like that, I would recommend being in a tree because you just never know. There's a lot of luck involved no matter how we skin this. And the only way to guarantee is to be there. So that'd kind of be my answer. It can be very dependent. I wouldn't automatically stay out during the lockdown phase.
And of course,
Yeah.
the hope is that you catch him between does. I mean, then your odds go way up because he's going to be on his feet. But can you catch that little window, when there's so many?
It's tough.
That's
There's
luck,
so many,
yeah.
there's so many does that are in, I feel like they go from one to the other at night. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just really jaded on that time frame because I've hunted it so many years and had so little success and just kicked myself in the butt every year saying, why am I out here doing this? Year after year after year and just never seeing anything. You'd think you'd catch them between does, but that hasn't been my experience. I mean, I'd love to hear what you other guys think because that's really frustrated me. Why am I not catching them between does when I've hunted this time frame for 30 plus years?
Yeah, that's very interesting.
I think there's merit to the argument of being out there, but if there's any value in mentally being right when you're in the tree, it would be a good time to mentally get right. We all know how much of a toll it can take, hunting 20, 30 days in a row, like some of us have the ability to do. Sometimes that mental break, I mean, if you're going to put the odds in your favor, that'd be a smart time to do it. Wouldn't you agree, Bill?
Yeah, and I think you get sloppy if you start getting burned out
Yeah.
because you stop believing that you're going to get him, because you've gone 6 days and you haven't even seen him, and maybe you've only seen a couple of bucks or whatever. I mean, it's been pretty dismal, and you put in all these long all day sits, and now you're just kind of going through the motions. In the back of your mind, you're thinking, I'm not going to kill this deer.
Right.
So you just do stupid stuff. You cut the corners rather than hunting the way that you should. And as soon as you find yourself doing that, you probably need to take a break because that's when you're going to screw it up. Yeah, that's been my experience. It happens to me every year. There's a certain point in there where you're like, man, I'm starting to hunt sloppy. I'm not going to the full extreme of what I know I should be doing. I'm getting lazy and cutting corners because I don't, in the back of my mind, actually believe I'm going to get him. Then it's time to get away for a little while at least and recharge.
I think that's probably some of the best advice that I've ever heard on a podcast. Honestly, it really puts things into perspective. I mean, if you're starting to ride.
But I do think though, like, and Jared makes a really good point though, because there's a lot of people whose vacation has already come and gone. Now they're hunting weekends. Would you have stayed out of your stand other than being cold and windy? Would you have stayed out of your stand this past weekend because it was during that lockdown? I mean, I wouldn't have, right? Because you got to be there. But if you have a lot of options of days when you can hunt, the days you should take off are the days, like this where it's pretty slow and tough.
We'll go.
What else you got? One more.
How did Bill find where certain bucks bed on his ridges?
Yeah, some of it is just all you know is that they're going to be on the ridges. You don't necessarily know exactly where they're going to bed. Typically, the deer bed further out towards the point. if it's a ridge that runs away from, a primary ridge, like a little secondary, like a point that goes out, they tend to bed more out towards the end of it, but not always. They bed all along that ridge. So I'm not necessarily narrowing it down to where I think the buck is bedding. I'm just trying to hunt that whole ridge and looking for general movement and hoping that the rut is like the blender that stirs him up and gets him on his feet. And then eventually he comes past me, whether he's, just cruising or following a doe or whatever, just being in the area where I think that deer lives. And that's no different than, the way I hunted on the farm that I sold to, is like, and I'm sure that's the way all you guys hunt, is if you think the deer lives in a certain area, you're just trying to hunt as close to that area as you can without spooking any deer as often as you can.
Mhm.
So they bed on the ridges in the country where I'm hunting now. So it's pretty straightforward. You don't have to guess. They're going to be up top.
Bill, when you're shed hunting in the spring, do you get a lot of information from that as well, especially on those ridges?
Yeah. I'm not a huge shed hunter. I just don't have the patience for it. I'm kind of like Jared, I think, from that standpoint. I start wandering around looking at trees, and next thing you know, I've spent the whole day, and all I've done was found scrape lines and rub lines and cool spots for tree stands, and
Right.
I haven't found a single antler, whereas another guy might have found 20 in there. So I'm not very good at shed hunting. I'll hit the obvious spots, but a lot of this just comes from growing up there in that country. Just the experience of knowing how the deer relate to it. And deer are pretty, once you get to learn how they interact with the terrain, they're pretty consistent about that. I think, and you can do the same thing in Kentucky as you do in Northeast Iowa. I think the terrain, they relate to the terrain in a very predictable way. So once you kind of get comfortable with how they relate to the terrain, you can project that to a lot of different places that you might hunt. So I wouldn't say that I'm doing anything special trying to find these deer, other than running trail camera. I just know they bed on the ridges. So if you can figure out which ridge he mostly likes to live on, then that's probably a really good starting point. Spend as much time as you can there without spooking anything.
Is it killing you not to have another tag in your pocket?
Yeah, I actually bought a farm, but we haven't closed on
really?
it yet. Yeah.
Awesome.
So yeah, I'm excited about it. I shouldn't say this publicly, I suppose, because my neighbors are probably going to hear about it, but I have low expectation for this spot. But I had to start somewhere because the land just isn't coming up for sale in that area. It's beautiful. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous farm, overlooking the Mississippi River and the Upper Iowa River. Just, I paid a lot of money for hunting land, which kind of grinds me, but it's more than that. It's very scenic, and Jason, what that country looks like up there.
Yeah.
All that bluff land. I've wanted to own it ever since I was a little kid, and now I've finally, bought a piece of it. So,
Good for you.
yeah, we'll see. Yeah, we'll see. I don't think it's going to be great, but that's okay. It'll be mine, and we'll have fun there.
Yeah.
That's
Oh,
awesome.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate you hopping on and chatting. It was good to catch up. Congrats on the buck. Congrats on the property.
Yeah. Thank you.
Congrats, Bill.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's fun to reconnect with you guys. We don't spend enough time talking and chatting like we really should, because you think of all the years we've compared notes, and now it's more, at least I'm on the outside looking in. You guys are still, I'm sure, carrying on that same tradition, but it's a lot of fun to have a peer group that you can ask questions of, because some of the things you're thinking might not actually be true, and then you bounce it off somebody else, and then you get a little bit of clarity. So it's kind of fun to have that again.
Yeah, for sure. That's kind of why we've enjoyed this format, just getting on in the evenings and hearing, how everyone else is doing. Because especially this time of year, sometimes we get stuck in our own little world, and it is good to have that connection and hear how things are going, whether it's comparable to you or not comparable to you. It's always good to hear it.
Yeah. Yep, for sure.
It
Well,
it
good
has
deal.
been super interesting. Just throughout this whole process. This is episode 14, I guess. And I've been shocked at the amount of times that the majority, and, there's always maybe one of us that doesn't have the same result as the other, but and I can remember several times, on a podcast where we've, 3 out of 5 of us have had virtually not, the same results, seen a bunch of deer, not seen a bunch of deer, whatever the case was, it was very similar. So it was pretty cool to get together and do that, and then
Yeah, and I
watch the
think,
season unfold.
and even like during the rut, you think, well, it's going to be dependent upon whether you've got a hot doe or not. I still think it's weather and barometric and all that driven more so than anything else. I feel like there are days when the light switch flips on and everybody in the Midwest, the lights on, that day. And then you think, well, it wasn't just because I had a hot doe, because this guy's 225 miles away and he had a great evening, on that day as well. So I just think it's kind of cool when you start looking at that big picture, trying to figure out what really is it, what causes some days to be that much better than the other days. And maybe there are people who have figured that out. I certainly haven't. I just hunt every day and hope for the best. But it is fun in hindsight to see that your really good days were really good days for almost everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Anybody have any final thoughts?
I don't think so.
Hopefully it breaks free. That's for sure. It sounds like we all are in need.
Oh, it will, Max. You just got to hang in there, buddy. It'll get good again.
End of the week, good weather, and hopefully getting out of lockdown.
Yeah. 20th. That's a good day. 20th through the 22nd. That's when you'll kill, Max. One of those 3 days.
All right, I'm putting my money on it. Then take the odds.
Oh,
Then a lot of deer are going to die in Wisconsin on Saturday.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be a high odds pick too, wouldn't it, in Wisconsin?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. All right. Well, if nobody's got anything else, thanks again, Bill, for joining us, and good luck to all of you for the rest of the journey.
Well, it was my pleasure, guys. Good luck.
Yeah, appreciate you guys.
thank you.
All right.
See you guys.
Talk to you soon. Yep.
All right. We're out. Thanks.